The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor Podcast. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook, and I'm delighted to be here, and even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. And you are listening to the Instructor Podcast, and this is a show where I speak to leaders, experts, innovators, and game changers to look at ways that we can help you improve your driving school business and potentially become an even more awesome driving instructor. And today I will let you decide which of those categories are appropriate because it is just me. So I will let you decide whether you consider me an expert, innovator, leader, or game changer because it is just me today. And before I tell you what's coming up on today's show, I'll just tell you briefly as for why it's just me. So the last couple of weeks, I have been quite ill, including at one point, losing my voice for a few days, which isn't ideal for a podcast. And that's meant that I've had to reschedule a couple of recordings. So my initial plan for today was just not to put an episode out. I was going to have like a mid-season break. But as I am now fighting fit and healthy, I've got just about enough time to record and edit and do all the other stuff that goes around that to release an episode for Sunday. So I thought it might be fun to do something a little bit different and talk a little bit about me and the podcast. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be answering some of the questions I get asked most around me and the podcast and all that kind of stuff. I've been giving you some top tips on what I consider to be a good practice for a driving instructor, including how to best manage your personal development. But just before we dive into the show, I want to give you a little bit of a nudge to go and follow me on social media. You can find the Instructor Podcast on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and even Twitter, although I'm not very active on Twitter at the moment, but you can find me in all of those places. That's where you'll find all the latest updates from the show. It's where you'll find links for everything I'm doing so you can keep yourself up to date with what's going on in the Instructor Podcast world. But as I mentioned, let's tackle a few of the questions I get asked most. Now, one that is coming up a lot recently, and this applies more to new listeners of the show, people that have just discovered it over the past 6 months or so, is where do I start? So they'll look at the show, they'll see there's nearly 130 episodes, over 100 hours of awesome content, and they want to know where to start. Now, the obvious sort of answer or the generic answer would be to go back to episode 1 and start there. And episode 1 is genuinely a really, really good place to start. Coaching for driving instructors with Bob Morton, excellent place to start. However, I would probably suggest not to. I would probably suggest because there is that much content here based around the 3 pillars that I built this podcast on, which is looking at sort of general instructor techniques, the business side, and the health side. Have a look at the episodes that are right for you. Scan through and either find a topic or a person that you are keen on or interested in and pick up that one and start there. Do not try and listen to 100 hours of this show in a week. You probably could, but it's not necessarily the best way to take that on board. So I would suggest by going back and looking at the shows that look most appealing to you. The other alternative you could do there would be to head over to the website. So if you go to www.theinstructorpodcast.com and then go to the tab where it says free stuff, over there you'll see different playlists for season 1, season 2, season 3. You'll see playlists for PDIs. I think there's a playlist for mindset. So there's different playlists available there where you can go on and just tackle that specific topic. So in terms of where to start, that would be my suggestion. But it's not just the Instructor Podcast. When you look at the feed, there's kind of 3 main shows. You've got the Instructor Podcast. This is the one that goes out on Sundays. This is the main staple of the show. This is a consistent one that never goes away. And this is these are the episodes where I usually speak to different guests, and we do a deep dive into a specific topic. But there are 2 other shows that you'll see around there as well. There is a green room, which is where me and a guest or guests, usually Chris Benstead, but we occasionally swap him out for let's say, a younger, improved model. That's the show where we look at the industry specifically. We look at the news and we look at industry specific topics. So if you're looking to get more into find out what's going on in the industry, that would be a good place to start. Or an alternative might be to go and look at short lessons. Now, short lessons where I go back to an early episode and pick out 5 to 10 minutes of gold, a piece of wisdom or information or inspiration that I believe could really help just by listening to that 5 or 10 minutes. And I think there's 16 or 17 of them at the minute. So they could be a good place to start because if you find one of those that you enjoy, you could also then go back and find the episode and listen to the whole episode. So as for where to start, there is no right or wrong answer. You just find the place that is appropriate for you. And if that is going back to episode one and listening through to every single episode, then do that. Personally, when I find a new show for the first time, what I tend to do is listen to the most recent and I keep up to date with the most recent episodes. But while doing that, I go back into the back catalogue and I find other episodes that interest me and listen to those. And the last thing I'll mention on that is that if you go back a couple of weeks on the podcast feed, you'll see that I have started re-releasing the early episodes. I'm re-releasing them with fresh edits, fresh intros, so it sounds better quality, and all that kind of shizzle. So even if you don't go back and listen to episode one now, eventually this stuff is going to be re-released into the feed. But yeah, that is where I would start. Another question that I do get asked quite a bit is why I started the podcast. Now, I have spoke about this before, but again, this is way back in the early episodes. So I will mention again now, the premise for this podcast was always to speak to businesses and people and products that I believed in, that I endorsed, that I wanted to promote, that I wanted to showcase, and then showcase them. It was to give listeners information and inspiration on a regular basis and build up this almost next fit, I can't say it, Netflix style content where you can just dip in and go back and listen to this thing on coaching or listen to this thing on the standards check or listen to this thing on growing your business or social media or whatever it might be to build up this wealth of content because I don't think there was anything out there like it. There was a lot of on-demand stuff already out there when I started doing it, but there was nothing that I found, and I could be wrong, but no one showed me anything yet. There was nothing I found that was updated this regularly with this variety and with this quantity, and that was something that I've gone for from day one: quantity, quality, and variety. And I believe I'm producing that. As we say, there's over 100 hours of audio free available to you to listen to for free. So that's where it comes from, and that premise is still the same. I still want to showcase people, products, and businesses that I believe in. I still want to provide information and inspiration for people that listen. I hope that every single episode that someone listens to, they can take something from. I really do. I hope that from today you can take something, whether it's just learning something new or whether it's being inspired. Speaking of being inspired, that's another thing that I get asked about sometimes, which is people saying that how do I have the confidence to go out and do this thing, the podcast or whatever, when I talk about openly that I'm introverted and that I'm not an overly confident person. So how do I, manage to do this, if you like? I generally had a quite simple philosophy for a few years now, which is you know, be scared of the thing and then do it anyway. What's the worst that can happen? So, I go back to, well, this episode today. If I do this random episode and nobody listens, and I look at my stats and it doesn't have as many listeners, and people are switching off after 5 minutes when they realize it's just me, well, I can take information from that and I can go, okay, that's not what people want. So therefore, I won't do any of these going forward, or at least I won't do many of these going forward. Whereas perhaps if the numbers are really high and I get feedback from this, then I can do more of this. Who knows? But there is no failure. there is learning. That's it. If this podcast fails, whether it's the overall podcast, whether it's the episode or whatever, that's not a failure on my part. That just shows that what I was doing wasn't right. And that could be that I'm not suited to this, or it could be that there isn't enough demand for this. So when it comes to that idea of doing something like this, I think that often it's taking a step back and going, well, there is no failure, there is only discovery. Um, I think I've just created that quote, so I'm going to use that. There is no failure, there is only discovery. And that is generally the premise I live with this stuff. We can even fast forward that to standards checks. There is no failure, there is only discovery. If you fail a standards check, yes, you have technically failed that standards check, but you have discovered what you need to do to pass next time, or what changes you need to make. So, yeah, that would be my answer around that one. I get asked a lot about CPD, continuous professional or personal development. And this is a really interesting one because I think it's different for everyone. I really, really do think it's different for everyone because people learn in different ways. People have different lifestyles. People have different time. My current life is very, very different to what it was 12 months ago. 12 months ago, I didn't have the time to do what I wanted to do or to do what I'm doing now. So I can actually do more CPD now than I could 12 months ago. And I think it's really important to take that on board and not try and compare what you're doing too much with everything else. The big thing I would say is to do something, just to do something and do something regularly. And I would say start off by picking one thing, one area that you want to work on. So, for example, for me, for the past 6 months, mate, it's mainly been about my business. It's not been about the technique of being a driving instructor. It's mainly been about the business. So that's where my focus has been. Now, I now realize that I've probably neglected that a little bit, and I've actually gone and taken steps to bring back into the technique of being a driving instructor, that specific skill. I've hired some people, I've gone to work with some people to build up that skill because I realized I probably neglected it a little bit too long, but I really would find one place to focus on. And the other thing you could do, and I've done this before, is divide the year up into quarters. So maybe quarter one, you look at the business. Maybe quarter two, you look at the technique of being an instructor. Maybe quarter three, you look at your physical health. Maybe quarter four, you look at your mindset, or maybe you do it monthly rather than quarterly and alternate all those things, or whatever it needs to be. I would suggest putting the emphasis on one thing, but not ignoring everything else. Now, as for what I do regularly, well, my big one, as you can probably guess, is podcasts and audio. So I listen to at least 4 hours of audio every day, or almost every day. Often it'll be 6 or 7. And that is podcasts, it is audio books, it's all that it's radio as well sometimes. But it's all that kind of stuff. And some of it will be around driving instructor stuff specifically, others will be around coaching, others will be around health. And what I do a lot of the time is I just let it soak in because I'm not going to take everything from every single thing I listen to. So I let it soak in. But if there is an episode of a podcast or if there is a specific audio book that I am finding really helpful, then I will save that and I will allocate that preferential treatment. And I will sit down with a notepad and pen the next time I listen to it and allocate time to listen to it and make notes and make a way to implement that. So for me, it's about audio. Now, yes, there are some videos I watch. I do some one-on-one training. I do attend webinars and stuff like that. But I try and do something every day towards my goal using my CPD. And for you, that might be 10 minutes of a podcast every day. And then you allocate an hour a week to go and put that into action or whatever it is. But the big thing I would say is start off with the one thing, and find what works for you. Now, obviously, another question I get asked a lot is about my premium membership. So I will take a moment to explain this because I don't think there's anything else like it in the industry. And that could be good or bad. I'm not saying it's either. I'm giving my sort of honest opinion there. And that's the feedback I get as well. So basically, the premium is a membership. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is why a membership? Why not just charging people for a one off thing that they want? And I go back to the podcast when I think about this, when I get asked this question, because this podcast is what I would want. That's at the heart of it. That's what it is. Occasionally, I deviate from that. Occasionally, someone will ask for a guest that I wouldn't have thought of, and that'll turn out to be awesome. But the podcast is largely what did I want to listen to 2 or 3 years ago? What would I want to listen to now? And that's what I put out there. And that's what the membership is. What would I want? If I signed up if I wanted to do this CPD, what CPD would be perfect for me? It would be this membership where I could pay just a recurring fee and get all this awesome content from some amazing people. So that was where this membership came from. I want that fed to me. I I the example I will give you, and this is probably going to sound silly, but it's true. In fact, I'm going to give you two examples. So first of all, I'm a bit of or used to be in particular, a bit of a wrestling nut. I love like WWE and stuff like that. I love the theatre of it, if you like. And there's a guy I subscribe to who interviews a lot of old wrestlers. Conrad Thompson, his name is, and I subscribe to his Patreon. And he set out a very clear goal that he wanted to provide loads of content, loads of quality, with the idea being that if you needed to reduce your finances for any reason, he would be the last thing to go because he's giving you this sheer quality, quantity, and variety. And that's something that inspired me because I was like, I want to provide that. I want this huge bank. And at the minute, there are now 100 exclusive trainings over in the Instructor Podcast Premium. And I wanted to provide this huge bank of trainings that people can just go and use and take the pick from, but constantly keep it updated. I anyone that signs up to my premium membership should improve their driving school. They should. It should pay for itself. If you implement at least some of the strategies that we talk about over there, you should easily cover the £10 or £22 a month it costs you. That shouldn't not be a thing. You should easily increase that, whether that's by increasing your time or your diary management or increasing the price of your lessons or whatever, you take away from this, it should be covered. It shouldn't end up costing you a penny. So that was always my goal around that. And that was where the membership model came from. The other thing I will just tag on to that is no one has to stay. And I do have a few members that jump in for a month, listen to all the stuff, jump back out, and then come back a couple of months later, jump in for a month, a month or two, and then leave again. They take what they want, they go away. They take what they want, they go away. And I have no problem with that at all. So that's where the membership came from, and that's why it's a membership. I want to give people this resource. And look, I will be completely honest, there is a financial aspect there. For me, the podcast I can manage, the podcast I can run without sponsorship, without payment, without all that stuff. It takes somewhere between 6 or 10 hours a week to run that podcast, and that's not a problem. But to deliver this extra content that people were requesting and people wanted and people are currently enjoying and benefiting from, there had to be a price there. And the most feasible one for me was a membership fee. But the pleasing thing for me was that even though I did it because it's what I would have wanted and it's what would have signed up for, a lot of other people have signed up as well. So it's obviously what other people want. So the other question I get asked around my membership is the different tiers. So there are currently three tiers: £2, £10, and £22. So the £2 tier, basically, you get nothing. I introduced that initially just as a way so that if people wanted to support the running costs of the show, they could come in and contribute £2 a month and they get nothing for it other than my eternal gratitude, which is surely worth something. But that was the idea behind the £2 tier, and it was nice. And it's always nice when people sign up to that because I kind of feel like they're saying we don't want any more, Terry. We're chock a block, but we want to say thank you for doing the podcast. So that was nice. But the £2 tier is just that. Then you've got the £10 and £22 tier. So I call the £10 tier that all the podcasts tier, that all the content tier. So basically, that's where all the exclusive shows go, which you get. I advertise as a minimum of two a month, but I usually do at least three or four, sometimes five or six shows a month. There's a regular newsletter type thing I put out on a Friday called that Friday Feeling. There's written posts that go up over there. There's polls that go up. There's a community that's being built over there. There's exclusive discounts for places like Bob Morton's Client-Centered Learning, the Guild of Mindful Drivers, the ADI and PDI Doctor, Coaching for Geeks Turbo, and Go Roadie as well. So there's loads of discounts over there. So even if you didn't make the most of your membership in terms of listening to stuff, you could easily get your money back just from signing up to one of those platforms. If you signed up to Bob Morton's Client-Centered Learning and saved a tenner, well, you're essentially getting the Instructor Podcast Premium for free. So that £10 tier is all about the content I've created and giving you that to listen to on demand with those extra perks as well. The £22 tier is what I call the interactive tier. So there are three main things here. So first of all, that's where the expert sessions go. So the first one, as you may or may not be aware, was recorded with Chris Benstead in April, and it was How to Teach Roundabouts. Really, really successful. Loads of people turned up to watch that. Really successful and really, really good feedback on it that I've shared with Chris. Constructive feedback as well. Everyone said it was good, but there were people that were actually taking time to say how it could have been even better, which I really appreciated because I think a lot of time people are dismissive of that, and I feel really good that these guys feel comfortable to offer suggestions. So yeah, definitely. But those expert sessions are basically think of a masterclass, think of presentations are very similar to that with the interactiveness of you being able to ask questions and so on and so forth. We've got one coming up in May with Kev Tracey Field talking about what we can do regularly to reduce test day nerves for learners. We've got another one coming up in June with Dave Shannon, who is going to be talking to us about tax. And then we've got another one in July with Ray Seagrave, who's going to be talking about rapport and how to build that rapport with your students and why it's so important. Going forward, these are going to be every quarter. So there will be one of these expert sessions every 3 months. And I should say there'll be at least one every 3 months because, as my premium members know, when I say at least, there's almost always more. But yes, there'll be at least one every 3 months. As well as that, on the interactive tier, that you get the opportunity to come and watch some recordings done live. So one of the most common ones is the episode dissection, which is where I give members a chance to vote on the previous episode they would like us to dissect. And then I record that, and some of the guys bob along and join in with those conversations. Green rooms are now often recorded live, so people can come and watch and or join in. You are not required to join in, but you can watch them being recorded live. And there are some other shows that are recorded as well, so you can come along and watch. And as well as that, there are problem solving sessions. So 4 times a month, I open up my Zoom room for 3 hours and allow people to come in and pick my brains and get their problem solved. Often there'll be, 2 or 3 people in there, so we can all brainstorm together if necessary. But the idea is you can come in and get your problem solved. And those sessions happen on 2 days a month. There is one weekday and one weekend day. And there is a early session and there is a late session so that everyone has the opportunity to come along. And they're the key kind of factors around that £22 tier. So you've got your £10 tier, you get all the content, the £22 tier where you get to actually be interactive with the content and get access to those expert sessions as well. One of the other questions I just wanted to address today was about resources, because I do get asked a lot especially by my premium members, about what resources I have and what resources I give to students. So everyone knows that my favourite resources are podcasts. So obviously I'm going to mention my own here, but there are three key ones that I would send to your students. The 5 Minute Theory podcast, the Driving Test Tales podcast, and the Driving Test podcast. So the 5 Minute Theory is essentially where I make each episode roughly 5 minutes, sometimes four, sometimes seven, but roughly 5 minutes. And it's covering specific questions around the theory or a specific topic within the theory and giving some top tips over there. That's probably my biggest podcast. It's got the most downloads. It recently ticked over 100,000 downloads, and it's great to see that's still doing well. There's 5 seasons of it, and I'm soon coming back for another season. But I would send that to anyone that is currently practicing their theory. And then the Driving Test podcast and the Driving Test Tales podcast are obviously based around the driving test. The Driving Test Tales is where I speak to someone who has passed their test about their experience on their test and learning to drive. The feedback I've got from that from learners is they found it really helpful, more so around their lessons and helping them prepare for a test in getting the right mindset and the right practical training. So that was good. And the feedback I got on the driving test, that's more kind of almost statistical. It's more like specifically about the test way, breaking it down, busting myths and giving top tips. And that's where I'm joined by other driving instructors. So three excellent resources you can send out there. I would also suggest the Confident Drivers podcast by Kev Tracey Field. I think that's a great one. And I'm going to mention it. I know that there is not everyone is a fan of this, but I also think Driving School TV. I do like Driving School TV. I don't necessarily agree with every single thing they say, but then again, not everyone agrees with every single thing I say, so I'm not going to hold that against them. But I think that they get people thinking and they get people talking and they get learners engaged. And I think that that is a good thing. And it's putting more of a spotlight on our industry. And here's the other great thing, they're very smiley and very friendly on it. And you look at how many instructors are really miserable and sulky on social media. Well, I know which one I'd rather the public saw. So I would also recommend Driving School TV. They're the ones that I generally send to my learners, the podcasts. And if they are using TikTok or videos or anything like that, I recommend that Driving School TV. So I'm going to leave it there for today because it is just me and I have been talking a lot and I am still recovering from my lost voice. But I hope you found this episode interesting or useful. I hope that you have found something informative or something inspiring. And I'm not planning on doing many, if any, of these again, but I kind of gave you the reasons as to why. But if you have got any thoughts on this episode, please let me know. You know that I love feedback, and I'd be fascinated to know whether you actually enjoyed the show, whether you'd like me to do one Terry solo show a season, or whether you never want me alone again because my voice is too boring, or whatever the case may be. I'd genuinely love that feedback. But I do want to take a moment to thank you all for listening. And the other thing I'm going to do, because it's my show, is that I'm going to add my own song to the Instructor Podcast Spotify playlist, and we are putting on Carry On Wayward Son by Kansas, one of the greatest rock anthems of all time, and also the theme tune for one of the greatest TV shows of all time in Supernatural. And if you haven't heard Supernatural or watched Supernatural, then I don't know what you're doing with your life. But for now, I'm going to leave it there. Again, please give me your feedback. I really do appreciate it. And remember, if you're not enjoying your job, you're doing it wrong.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.